At the end of last year, Riot Games announced that they were working on a brand new first-person shooter. This came as a bit of a shock to some people, as Riot is most well known for their MOBA, League of Legends. Nevertheless, there was and still is a lot of intrigue around it because League of Legends is one of the biggest games in the world, and if the developers of that are stepping into the first person shooter ring, then it's worth standing up and taking notice. Back then the game was only known as Project A, but now we have a full name, Valorant. Now I was due to go to a capture event, but due to unforeseen circumstances that was cancelled, so instead they've sent me a file which was full of gameplay footage and extra information. So we're going to dive into that today and take a look at everything that Valorant has to offer and all that we know so far. Let's start with the elephant in the room. I know this game is going to get compared to Counter-Strike and probably Overwatch a lot. In fact, I'm going to do it too. But Valorant is trying to take some of the better elements of those games, such as the skill-based gunplay and the economy system from a game like Counter-Strike, while combining it with character abilities that you would most likely see in other titles like Overwatch. With that out of the way, what exactly is Valorant? Well, it's a competitive 5 versus 5 first-person shooter for PC. That part's important because right now there is no information about any console versions. This is a PC game. The game is a round-based shooter with a Counter-Strike search and destroy style game mode. The winning team will have to get the best of 24 rounds. MR12 for the old Counter-Strike players out there. Now I mentioned before that this is a character-based shooter and I'll talk a little more about that shortly, but when you do pick your character before a game, you need to remember that you're then locked into that choice for the duration. You can't change every round, so picking a good team dynamic is going to be really important. In terms of the setting, Valorant is set on a near future Earth. All of the characters that you choose have backstories and history relating to known world locations and countries. Think Rainbow Six Siege, where they've got the operators from certain nations with a very noticeable theme and backstory. And when it comes to abilities, each character has 4 available to them and each one is going to play differently in certain situations with different strengths and weaknesses. Out of those 4 abilities, you will get one for free every round. That one is your signature ability. And then you also have your ultimate ability, which must be earned through kills. Of course, how long it takes you to earn this ability really depends on how the game is going. Then the other 2 abilities are tied to the game's economy system and you have to buy them in the pre-round buy phase with your earned income. Think utility in Counter-Strike. In CSGO, for example, most teams are buying stuff like flashbangs, HE grenades, smoke grenades and Molotov. Well, if you consider the abilities more as utility for the round like they are in Counter-Strike, it starts to make a bit more sense. We've not seen all of the characters in the game just yet, but we have seen a few clips that get us an idea of who we're going to have at our disposal. Phoenix, for example, can throw fireballs and rise back from the flames with full health. Jet is about using wind and fog to evade her enemies, and Viper utilizes toxic clouds and deadly acids. Sage, on the other hand, is able to heal and protect her allies. These are just a few of the characters that the game will have available. If you start to think of some of the abilities as grenades, like I said earlier, it might be a bit easier for someone who hasn't played the game yet to grasp. Imagine Phoenix using his fireball as an area of effect to remove an enemy that you think is hiding on the back of a bomb site or objective. Then perhaps Jet can utilize one of her fogs to help you attack or defend as a team, like a smoke grenade, either pushing onto an objective to reclaim it or attack. As I mentioned earlier though, once you've picked your character, you're stuck with them for the entire match, so you need to have one that's going to suit your playstyle. It seems as though some are more attack minded while others are definitely aimed at more of a support role. Honestly, I think this lines up with how most CSGO teams play anyway, even professional teams. Even though all of the players on a pro team play to a really high standard, you are always going to have certain players who are the fraggers and attack minded, and you will put them in positions to try and get kills, so you're going to want them to have the more attack minded characters. And then your support players who perhaps sit back a bit more and watch angles can offer up more of a healing or tactical role. Now, I mentioned earlier that Valorant uses an economy system, something that CS players will be quite familiar with. Winning rounds and getting kills is going to help you earn money that you can use on weapons, abilities, and replenishing your shields. And from what I found out, your team will gain $3,000 for a round win and between $1,900 to $2,900 for a round loss. So just like in CSGO, it seems as though a losing team will gain more money for each round that they lose in a row. It's a way to help the team who are losing multiple rounds consecutively buy full gear quicker to try and get back into the game as a loss bonus. You'll also gain $200 per kill. Just bear in mind though that these are early figures, and with the game not even being released yet, these are all subject to change. Even still, you can get a rough idea from that of how the system will work. All of that really means nothing though if you don't know how much the abilities and weapons cost. Well, we have a rough idea of that, and with that we can also talk about some weapons. There are a few SMGs available, with the Stinger costing 1,000 and the Spectre costing 1,600. For rifles, there's the Bulldog, which is 2,100, and the Phantom is 2,900. The Operator is a heavy hitting sniper rifle, that's 4,500, and all of these names will probably mean nothing to you yet, but from what I can tell, the Operator, for all intents and purposes, is basically an AWP from CSGO, with the Spectre being very similar to an SMG, and the Vandal being similar to an AK. What about map design though? Because in any 5v5 game, it's really the map design that the game's success or failure depends on. Well, the graphic style of the game leans heavily towards very crisp and clean visuals. It's not only the maps, but also the character models and their silhouettes. There isn't a whole lot of clutter around the levels. Instead, the game has opted very much for a minimalistic approach. And I know some people may see this as a negative and think the game looks bad. Well, yeah, the game might not look as good as Modern Warfare or Battlefield 5, but if you think back to when CSGO came around, or even Source, there was a huge jump in visual fidelity back then, and not everyone was on board with it. I remember when the remastered Mirage came into CSGO, and a lot of players really disliked it because they were so used to the much simpler and cleaner lines and visibility of the original. So what I'm saying is that for a competitive game like this, I personally like that the maps are a bit more stripped back. But in reality, I think only a hands-on approach will tell us how they play. From a design perspective though, I think they seem very similar to Counter-Strike Global Offensive maps with distinct lanes and channels. The gameplay that we've seen so far also had 3 bomb sites on one map, A, B and C, which is definitely a little different, but I'm not sure if all maps will have that same design. One of the things that Riot have been really keen to showcase with this game though is an unprecedented approach to server quality and anti-cheat, arguably the two biggest cruxes of not only Counter-Strike Global Offensive but most online first-person shooters on PC. If you play CSGO online, you will no doubt be familiar with the phrase 64 tick or 128 tick, and playing on the latter is a huge difference compared to the 64 tick rate of matchmaking servers. Well, Riot have said that they want to ensure that that isn't an issue with their upcoming game, and hit reg is always spot on, and because of that, all servers will be dedicated 128 tick rate servers. FPS players rejoice everywhere. Interestingly, they've also said that Valorant upscales all player movements to 128 FPS, so that means even if your opponent is lagging due to, say, a poor internet connection, then the servers will upscale their movement to 128 FPS to make sure everything is smooth. As well as that, Riot have said that they're trying to get rid of the peeker's advantage as seen in a lot of FPS titles. One of the ways that they're doing this is by investing in infrastructure called Riot Direct. Riot have been working with ISPs to set up peering arrangements to get players onto the Riot gaming networks as soon as possible. And Riot Direct apparently has a global network in 35 cities around the world. And the result of that is to ensure that players have less than a 35 millisecond ping for at least 70% of the player base around the world. It all sounds impressive, but of course the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and we'll see if it's really that good. Probably the bigger issue though is anti-cheat, and they're tackling that head on too. The game will have a proprietary anti-cheat detection on day one. I won't go into too much detail on how they're combating this, but their servers have very impressive systems in place, making it, as they say, impossible for players to use systems such as speed hacks and teleportation hacks, and player reporting is done on such a smart way on engine level that it will render wall hacks useless because of this fog that they're supposedly using in the rendering engine. And all of that isn't even taking into consideration the actual anti-cheat detection. As we know, somehow people will always find a way around every system, but I'm impressed with what Riot have shown us and put forward so far to combat cheating, and I really hope that it works. Wrapping things up, one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that this game will be free to play. And all in all, I think I'm really intrigued by Valorant. It definitely has a core DNA that is heavily inspired by Counter-Strike. If you just watch the gameplay, the gunplay, the movement, the weapons, the money system, the rounds, even down to the economy and footsteps, you can see that Counter-Strike is definitely a massive inspiration for this game. And I'd hazard a guess that a large volume of the developer team play it quite regularly and have played it a while. You even run faster with your knife out. There are a few small concerns that I have though, based on just watching the footage. Like I said, I haven't played this yet, but I've noticed that characters do have a lot of voice lines, especially when they get kills. I'm just not a big fan of that. I don't think you need that in a competitive game like this, so I hope you can turn that off. And I especially hope that enemies nearby you can't hear those callouts. But it's due out in the summer, and I think we'll get the beta very soon. Valorant is definitely going to be one to look out for. With that said, let me know your thoughts on the game down in the comments below. What do you guys think so far? If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.